Why are you all here? Don't know. It was the first door outside. No. Why are you here? Oh, you hurrah! The other session was cancelled. It's always good to start on a positive note, isn't it? So, okay, so number one, you don't know why you're here, okay? Oh, okay, right. Is it anybody's third choice? Yeah, okay. The reason I'm asking why you're here is the real question is, how far do you think you are involved in testing? That's the first question. Hands up who says not at all. Good, not at all. No testing. Are you a teacher?
Testing.
I would argue if you're a teacher, you're always involved in testing. That would be my response to that. Who consciously does testing? Consciously, you know you're testing, that's most of you. Who knows about testing and has written tests and feels very familiar with testing and perhaps writes tests that other people use? Anybody? Sometimes. Okay. Right. It's a very sensitive subject, testing. I'll just show you what we're going to do today very quickly before I talk generally about it. So what we're going to look at in the workshop, and we've actually got quite a lot of work to do in the sort of hour and 15 minutes, I want to start by talking to you about testing principles that sit behind a test. And then we're going to look at some productive tasks and some objective tasks. I'll be asking you to do a lot of work. What do you think, etc. But first of all, we'll start with testing principles. Now, there's a couple of things I feel very strongly about in testing. When you test anybody, you are touching them as a person. You are potentially changing them as a person when you test them. And I want you to keep that in mind all the way through the session. I don't know if any of you can think back to when you failed a test and how you felt. So, for example, I failed my first driving test. And I felt rubbish, and I knew I was rubbish beforehand, and it confirmed I was rubbish, you know. I reversed into a bush, it wasn't good. So can you all remember a time when... Can everybody put their phones on silent, please? Can everybody remember a time when they failed a test? Or are you all super bright, expert, excellent people?
Share that today.
Well, we're sharing now. We're sharing. We're being open and honest. So just remember how you feel when you fail a test. Even if it's a tiny mini test. I think the danger with testing is people think, oh yes, it's that big kind of standardised national or international stuff, and it's not. It's actually potentially quite damaging if you don't do it correctly, even on a small scale. Now, I suspect most of you will have heard of the notion of high stakes, mid stakes, and low stakes testing. Yeah? Hands up who believes those three categories exist. Yes, no? Speak to me. Low stakes, mid stakes, and high stakes. Who believes those three categories exist? Anybody?
So, but going by your definition that every test touches you, I mean, everything is high stakes.
Good, that's the right answer. Good, we're all on the same page. Yes, I would argue all tests are high stakes. They're high stakes for somebody, they matter, and that's why we have to take testing principles very seriously. Now, a very good example of this is my colleague here in the front row, John Gardine, our head of drama. And we were having this debate at Trinity about high-stakes tests, which tends to be a word used for the big international exams or leaving school exams, or, you know, you're going to get a job or you're going to get into university is the traditional definition. And John said he went to his daughter's school. I think his daughter was about 7 at the time. And he went to his daughter's school because at his daughter's school they were doing a performance. They were putting on a show. And the show was quite low-key. It was a class just doing a show, and Daddy was there to watch it. But as John said, the stakes could not have been higher for his daughter. And that's a classic example of why it matters. So I'd just like you to really bear that in mind. That's one thing. The second thing I'd like you to think about is how lazy are we when we test somebody? By that, I mean, do we just test what's easy to test? How often do we try and test the things that are difficult to test? Or do we just go, no, we'll do some multiple choice on vocabulary because that's easy, or grammar? So there's a challenge for yourselves about what you might want to test. And so basically what we're going to be talking about today, I appreciate you don't all write tests, but it's to help you judge tests as well, so that when you look at a test, maybe you look at a test in a course book and you might think, actually, no, I'm not going to do that with my students because I don't think it's very good and therefore it will damage them. So we'll do something else to assess them. So the 3 key principles for testing, if I've got the slide right, which some of you, many of you will know, are validity, how valid the test is, reliability, and impact. Okay, so how valid is your test, how reliable is it, and what impact, what effect is it going to have? And we will just look at those 3 separately. And I will give you some examples. So validity is generally how do you know you're testing what you think you're testing? How do you know you're testing it? So obviously with vocabulary you probably feel it's quite easy. But if your item of vocabulary is in a great long chunk of reading, what are you testing? Are you testing reading or are you testing vocabulary? So validity is how do you know and how can you prove you're testing what you think you're testing? We'll look at what it looks like. Reliability, of course, affects you slightly less in the classroom. It's very, very important for international tests that they are reliable, that you can take that test at any time, anywhere, and you would get the same result. In other words, the standard and the scoring is reliable. That probably affects you slightly less in the classroom, but it is something to think about, that you have to, stay within the bounds of the principles that you've set. And of course, impact is very important. There is a theory that, what I call gap fill exercises, closed exercises, where you've got a text and you've possibly got to complete 7 pieces of vocabulary or 10. Do you know they've discovered that people that are good at that are not people who have good grammar or good vocabulary. They're people who are very good at crossword puzzles. So I say, what are you testing? Are you testing my crossword puzzle skills and competencies? Or are you testing my grammar and vocabulary? So you have to think about impact in the classroom of what you're doing. If you test somebody on hundreds of pieces of vocabulary, they're just going to go away and learn hundreds of pieces of vocabulary and not to join them up. So we're going to look at some examples now. I shall get you to do some work. So there are different aspects to validity. There's not time, you'd have to do a whole testing course to go into all the different strands, but there's things like construct validity, face validity, context validity. What is being measured How do we make sure we're testing what we think we're testing, okay? So, sorry, I'm also, before I start, I'm going to apologise. This whole presentation was written in a different font that the computer here doesn't recognise. So it's reverted back to Times Roman. So the first test is, can you see the screen? Can you read anything? So, validity, what's being measured? And the example is, write a review of an art exhibition you have been to, a writing task. Okay, you have got about 30 seconds to decide with each other, what are we testing with that? If that's a test, if that was a writing test, what are we testing? Can you just discuss with each other for 30 seconds? Creative thinking.
Critical
Can you explain that?
Particular the person who is going to write about it, so he has or she has to be creative little bit. Like if he is writing a report over there, what he saw at that time in the art exhibition, so he or she has to be creative little bit.
Okay.
Past tense.
Points of view, past tense.
Critical writing computation.
Critical writing skills, evaluation. Analysing, sorry? Comprehension of what? Oh, composition, yes, sorry.
Range of language voice also.
Passive voice.
Range of language use.
Creative language.
Whether the punctuation marks are used properly at the place.
Punctuation, you could be testing, yeah, cohesion.
The sequence of events.
The sequence, the organisation. So that's quite interesting. You're all absolutely convinced that that's testing a huge range of things. Did anybody see any problems with it?
I'm presuming I know the word review. I may be stuck with the word review.
Yeah, but let's assume as it's a test that you've taught your students how to do review and they know.
I think it's almost impossible to decide what we can test with this because it's possible to test anything really, depending upon what you want.
Yeah, though I would say there is a theory called genre theory which says a review or a report looks like this, and so you could test whether your student had the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. Any criticism of it?
If this piece of, if this question is supported with an evaluation criteria, as it is a content-loaded question, the students would be able to write it well.
How do we, you've all said, oh, it's testing cohesion, organisation and passive and passive. How do we know it is? How do we know that?
Until instructions are given.
Yes, I think there's two huge problems with that. One, you have to have been to an art exhibition to be able to answer it. And two, I don't know if you've ever tried this, writing about something visual is unbelievably difficult and way outside the capacity of someone at B2 who this might, it's a very sophisticated skill. So you're saying to your students, right, I'm going to test you on the past tense, and I'm being very critical, but I think it is. But my point there is, how do you know you're testing what you think you're testing? Let's look at another example. You'll know they're all tricks now, won't you? Does the task match the test specification? So even I would argue, even if you're doing a test in class, you would say, well, this is what I need the test to do. And of course you want to test a range of skills. It's pointless just testing one skill. So here's some examples. Is the test fair? So there's two examples there. Again, can you spend 30 seconds discussing them and telling me if you think they've got any problems? Ask one half of the class to do the present tense and the other half to do the past tense.
And one more point, the first one, he has to talk about the best friend, it's very easy. But for the second one, you have to
zoo, yes, maybe they haven't been to a zoo. So you've created, because of the difference you've created an unfair test. And I'm not being critical, it can very easily happen. You can think, well, we've done this in the course book and we've done this in the course book, so I'll ask them to do this. But you've actually created something very different. And if some of the students don't do very well because they've got the second one, I go back to my first point, they then feel rubbish because their classmates did much better and had a much easier question. I've given you a very obvious example here, but it's something you should be thinking about the whole time when you're looking at tests or you're choosing tests or activities for your students or you're trying to create a test. So the test is unfair, so it's not valid.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So what happens when you, I don't know the answer, but what happens when you want to differentiate it because you have kids at different levels?
Well, then you should capture that inside the test item. So you might have, instead of these three very similar points there, you might have an easy point, a middle point, and a difficult point. And what will happen, of course, is the weaker students won't say very much on the difficult point. So they'll say something, but not much, so you'll be able to differentiate with them. And you should also be able to see that when you're looking at international tests or national tests. You should be able to see that discrimination, it's called. That's a good point. Yes.
What if you give the same group, if you give both items, so that the children can select?
Okay, well, you can't give them an option where the options aren't the same. You might want them to do both tasks, but you cannot give them an option where the options aren't the same, because what will happen is the children will go, oh my God, I went to the zoo yesterday, so I'm going to do the zoo one because I want to talk about the zoo. And they don't realise the trick that's inside there. They've then got to know the past tense and everything. And people do that because it's language, it's about themselves. They're like, oh, I've been to the zoo, I want to talk about the zoo. And they walk straight into choosing, and again that can happen on international tests, they choose the one that feels familiar to them, not realising the layers of, if you like, issues there, or skills or competences that are being tested. You could give them both, but it would depend when. That might be the end of the year when they've done the present tense and they've done the past tense and whatever. You don't want to confuse them. Right, let's look at another. Okay, because there's 4 validity points I'm making here. So the first one was, how do you know you're testing what you think you're testing? The second one is the test fair? Now this one is about real life, which we've mentioned already. It's a blindingly obvious one here, so we'll do it together. Imagine you are running a large company. Write a proposal saying what you would do to increase sales. Now, what kind of test would this be in?
An unrealistic one.
The business.
Hang on a minute, what kind of test would this be in? This wouldn't be secondary school, would it? It would be... It's a business test, so arguably it's a fair thing. When you look at international business tests, it's probably the sort of thing you say, well, you've done business English, so yes, you know, say you're C1 level. Can you do this? Now, so is it appropriate for the test taker? Yes, possibly. Does it reflect real life, which is your point, I think?
As far as students are concerned, for them it's a difficult task. They don't know how to increase sales.
Might not have any exposure to the company.
Yes, you might have somebody who's doing business who's sort of at the lower or middle level in the company. They've got to imagine running a large company. They probably would be running one if they could imagine. And then they've got to increase sales. So it's not real life, is it? It's It's just not real life, it's impossible. So you're not testing the language you want to test. What you're testing is imagination and, you know, whether you're brave enough to take this on. Now, what impact would that have? Imagine you were teaching a group of students, business students, and this is the kind of thing they were tested on at the end. What effect would that have in the classroom? What would you be doing in the classroom if you knew your students had to answer that?
Case studies.
Case studies?
So that we prepare for a question.
Yeah, okay. Any other ideas?
Creating a context for them, because this is just not contextual for a school student. So maybe a lesson.
No, I'm saying if imagine you were teaching a group of business, you know, business sort of MBA students or maybe people inside a business.
An interview with
Reading magazines.
Reading magazines, yeah. Interviews with, you know,
Top CEO.
Steve Jobs, God bless him, or, you know, other people, Rupert Murdoch. And is that going to help them in their business English? So what you've ended up with is a task that distorts the learning in the classroom. And you don't want that, do you? Sorry, did you?
I just wanted to say, wouldn't they also need to have the language, the vocab that they need to express themselves?
Yes, but in a way you want them to have the language, don't you? But it's in what context are they going to be learning that language? And that's not a great way to push that language.
Why is it? I think that the idea, don't know why it's such a good way. As long as they are doing business and they need this language and they need to know how to write.
But if you have the opportunity, you've got two choices in the classroom, haven't you? You can teach language in the context that the students are going to realistically be using it, or you can teach it in another context and they will probably learn the language, but maybe they won't be motivated, maybe, you know, because it's a context they can't understand, they can't get their heads around. Yeah.
What if I'm working for an organization?
Yes.
And I am going to write proposals as part of my job.
Yes.
Does this kind of assessment make sense then?
No.
Even then?
No. What you would want to write is the kind of proposal you would realistically write as a middle level manager, which might be a new idea for something for the company, for example.
What if as part of my job I will end up writing proposals for potential clients?
Yeah, but what kind of proposals are they? That's my point. What kind of proposals are they going to be? The question should be, yes, this is a proposal, but it should relate to what your student or the candidate will actually do in real life. How are they going to use that language? It's not just any old proposal, you know, so we're teaching them how to write a proposal. It's more meaningful to them and more motivating if they can see how they're going to use it in real life. And arguably, it's unfair to test them on what's not real life, is my point here. I'm going to move on, because we've got one more to get through. The last one, which is quite hard, I don't know how often you do this, is imagine you are writing a test for your students, even in term or whatever. You should compare it with an external measure that you trust. Now that might be the CEFR, it might be another national or international test you trust. You shouldn't just write it. Maybe you should ask your other teachers, your colleagues, to say, do you think this is the right level? So that you get a level agreement. You're not testing outside the level. So for example, for Trinity, how do we know that our integrated skills exam is B2 on the CEFR? Because we have formally measured and mapped it. And the same for Jessie. And you do that basically by asking lots of people what they think. Now for us, we have to ask a lot of academics, but if you're in a school, you could ask your fellow teachers. So that is validity. Reliability, I think, affects you less on a day-to-day basis, though of course it's very important. This is what reliability is. It's come out rather weird. And I think you're all familiar with that, aren't you? That makes sense. So it comes back to the contrast we had between the zoo and the best friend. You've got to have examples that are the same. And then a very, very important one, I'm going to get you to do some more work in a minute, is impact. So some important points about impact. Remember I said every time you test someone, you touch them, you have an impact, you have an effect on them, and you have an effect on the teacher in the classroom. So the impact can be in the classroom, how you teach. It can be within a whole education system, your national standard tests. It can affect society more widely. What if some people can't reach that standard? Very important that your test is not separate from the curriculum. We should think about testing as a narrative in a student's progression, not as an event. It's part of their progression. And you want your test to be nice, basically, because you want it to have a positive impact on the teaching. So these are all the things that I want you to think about as we look at some examples now together. So I put up here some typical test items. So productive test items are speaking and writing tasks, and sometimes they're mixed. You have to read something and then write. Objective test items I'm sure you're all familiar with. Multiple choice, multiple matching, ordering, putting things in the right order, gap filling, and sentence completion. And so these, you, the teacher, or somebody else, you have a human marker, don't you? And these are just numbers. This is like a quantitative test. So that's the split between them. So we're going to start by looking at some productive test items. Now, some of the problems in these are not... They're problems in Europe, if that makes sense, because I've taken some sort of typical examples from European tests, but the principle behind the problem is the same. Right, that is an actual live test item. Can you spend 30 seconds with each other and tell me what's wrong with it? What problems did we have with it? Right, so I have you, this was a test item, I'll be honest with you, this was a test item we had in a Trinity test, a speaking prompt. We pre-tested it, it was all fine, it went live, and it had a problem. Does anybody know what the problem is?
Yes.
Yes.
Actually, it's not a prompt. If you see the statement, means the person has to brainstorm the thing. Means
yeah, can I just...
To speak.
Okay, sorry, I should have explained. I do understand that. It's part of, it doesn't make sense out of context, but it's part of a Trinity test where we make the students ask questions. So it fitted the test specifications in that sense. Okay, that wasn't the problem.
We felt there was sort of lots of different responses you could give to it, like such as, well, it's my birthday next week too. You know, or something like that.
Yes, they are, and again, I come back to the task specifications. They are told what they've got to do beforehand. There's something inside the item that's problematic.
I'm not sure what to do is put off for us for the speech. That means
oh, you think you'd have to think creative what to do? Ah, yes. Do you want to say something more about that? Shout.
He's not sure what's his stop.
I thought that something special is the word
What
that
we can
they
say on
use.
that?
Yes. Yeah, you're right. Something special is the problem. Do you know why? Because when we took it to students, candidates in China, they all said, well, we don't really celebrate birthdays and we certainly don't do anything special, so we don't actually know what you're talking about here. So culturally, it wasn't fair across the world. And my point here is you can, obviously, you know, it's different in India, but my point is you can walk into this trap very, very easily of thinking something is universally accessible and it's actually not. So you cannot make any assumptions. That's number one. Let's have a look at another one. Oh yes, I crossed out special there because that's what we had to do. So organising something was fine. Something special really threw me. I don't know what special is, you know. Not because they didn't understand it, they didn't know how to respond. Right, here's a rather obvious one. This is one we rejected. We didn't accept this on our test.
That's not usually done. Gap year, we don't have that system.
Exactly, exactly. So that was a problem with item writer training. They thought, oh, I mean, it's not only that it seems to be only British kids that have gap year, it's middle class British kids. So it's a very tiny group of people that have a gap year. There's another problem there though. Sorry?
So what do you want me to do? Do you want me to express regret?
No. It's inside. The problem is inside the task, not what the students got to do with it.
Lots of kids don't go to university.
Good. Who said that? Yes, lots of children don't go to university. So it's a double thing, is it? You don't go to university and you don't have a gap year, so you actually don't know what to say here. Not because you don't know the language, but because you don't understand the context. So we crossed out gap year, university, which means we haven't got a question, so we rejected it. This is a C2 level one. I think you're getting good now. I think you can tell me what the problem is with this. Well, we're saying children, anybody, will get very, very upset. And if they're very upset, they will not be able to do the test in a fair way. So I come back to this point. You're not testing their language. You're not testing their skills. You're testing, you know, you can't get it. In class, he might have been prepared to talk about that with the other students. In a test, it was just completely unfair for him. That's an extreme example, but I'm just saying, when you're testing, you've got to give everybody the best chance to do their best, not to make it difficult. Right, a more complicated one. Oh God, I don't know if you can read this. Sorry, the writing's so small. Hang on, I'm just going to think if we've got time to do this. Just chuck it out so you can read it. Typical question, you've received a large sum of money, it was a complete surprise, you want to spend it on travelling to a place you've never seen before. Write a letter to a friend saying where the money came from, giving details of your travel plans, ask your friend to go with you. B1. Right, you've got 30 seconds to decide what problems are there. What's the problem with this? Too many words. Too many tenses.
Social status?
Sorry?
Social status?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I don't think it's any good because you're telling the candidate exactly what to do. You're not giving them any choice. You're not allowing them feels engaged with the question because they can imagine it. This, you're being told what to do. Okay? I'm going to race on because we've got to, not sure we can get in. Very important, I want to talk to you about multiple choice questions. So we had to delete all that. So I think you've got plot on productive test items. They must be fair, clear and unambiguous. I'm reading it because the writing's so small. Accessible, easier than the level you're targeting, so you're not testing reading. Real world. And the benefits of being able to use them with students as a test, they reflect real life. It's a nice positive activity in the classroom. Right. And you must allow them to use their own language, to put themselves in it, because language expresses your own identity. So we're coming on to the big problem now, objective test items. And what we're going to do is look at multiple choice only, because multiple choice is the core of objective testing. And if you understand multiple choice, you will understand everything else. Somebody very, very well known in the testing world once said to me, anyone can write a multiple choice item. No. I beg to differ. So let's just get the terminology right, okay, before we start. Multiple choice questions have two parts, the question and the options. So you've got your question, options. And in your options, you've got a key, which is the answer, and your two distractors, which are your wrong answers, if you like. Okay, so we've got the question, the distractor, and the key. So let's start, because we're running out of time here. Okay, is that, you've got 10 seconds with each other. Is that a good or a bad multiple choice question? And why?
Well, on the third one, it's like you are leading them to think this.
Yeah, this
could
is
be
the
the
answer.
answer, or it could be a distraction.
Okay, I can tell you're very good at this. So, none of equal length. What's the other problem? Well, there's hundreds of problems. Opinion about what? Yeah. Where does the poor student find the information in the text, whether it's reading or listening? So the question must stand on its own, okay? More problems?
The first one is specified, the second one is not specified, like just support the ban.
Yeah, this is a very, very famous, you'll see these sort of multiple choice questions everywhere. They are truly terrible and you should never ever use them. You've got a positive, a negative and a maybe don't know. I call them black, white and grey questions and you see them all over the place and they're shocking, okay? And as you say, they're a different structure. Right, let's have a look at another one then. So we had there, question must be clear on its own, distraction must be real, i.e. not just an opposite. Options must be similar in length and structure, you said, and they must all have the same focus. Right, I'm going to put these up as a list at the end. Next one. What are the problems? Again, you've got 10 seconds. All the answers are correct. What are you doing? Yes? If you were a student and you didn't understand the text, what would you choose? B. So in other words, this is testing general knowledge. It's not testing understanding of language or the text, it's testing general knowledge. We can all guess B is the answer.
C is also an option.
Yeah, it's quite specific, but most students, if you didn't understand the text, if you'd heard and you'd like, oh my God, what shall I put? You'd put B, wouldn't you? Because it's true. Right, and the last one, so the question must test understanding, not general knowledge. And you know why this happens? Because people write 3 options, and they put the one in the text, and they think, oh, I can't think what to put for the 3rd one. So they put something down that seems plausible, and it becomes true. You really need to think. Right, you've got a little bit of text there. What's the problem? Don't say it's got 4 options. What's irrelevant? Yes. We don't know which man. Yes. We can't. So, in other words, the question doesn't identify what we're listening for. That's one problem. Another problem?
They are not distractors because it's obvious that they are not the right answer. So we are left all 2 options.
Well, D is obviously wrong, isn't it? Nobody would go for that. So in other words, it's not a fair test because D is not working. So what's it doing there?
And C connects something of the
Yeah, and A, B, and C are all kind of true, aren't they?
A or C. There might be 2 answers.
Well, I think there's 3, you know. And very, very typically, this is an example of what you get in multiple choice questions. I mean, A and B are true. You could say, well, C not something, it's not really true. But the problem with C is it's what we call it's not wrong enough. It's got to be really wrong, okay, not wrong enough. So, brilliant, marvellous. I think you're all very good at this. You've written tests before. So the question must identify where to listen and read. Let's look at them all together quickly. Those are your rules for writing multiple choice questions. And if you ever write a multiple choice question, or if you ever look at a multiple choice question in a book, if it doesn't follow those rules, you should not give it to your students because it's not fair. You don't know what you're testing them on. So, then I thought, just in the last few minutes, because I know now that you're all very good, you might like to try writing a multiple choice question together.
Ma'am, please, will you please wait for a minute?
Yeah. I'll go backwards so it's in black. Yeah, the positive, negative questions, hate them. Oh, but I can put this up at the end. I'll go on because we're running out of time a bit. Sorry, this has gone. I'm not going to do that bit. So the summary is validity. You've got to remember about validity. It's about being fair, accessible, and authentic. And you shouldn't be giving somebody a test unless you know that those principles are met. And so we've done productive. Hang on a minute. We're not going to do that one. Now, some people in the audience will recognise this. Right. Now, of course, another form of multiple choice question is not a question, it's a sentence that the options finish, isn't it? So you have the beginning of a sentence, and A, B, or C could finish that sentence. Okay? So you've got some text there. This is actually from a real live test. It's a listening text. Somebody talking about their sporting life. And the test item for the students, you're going to try and work out how much of this text have they understood. What have they understood about what the student is saying, the speaker is saying. So your item begins, students who practice a sport, and you're going to give your students 3 options, A, B or C. Right, I shall give you about 3 minutes to write 3 options. You'll be super fast item writers. What choices could you give the students? The distractors are difficult, aren't they? Because it's quite a thin piece of text, as we say. The truth seems blindingly obvious, so how do you get distractors? Do you have an option? Okay.
First one is learn how to manage their time.
Yes.
The second one, live an organized life.
Yes.
Not mention them, but they
Okay. Yeah.
They work hard.
Okay, so that was learn.
The first one is learn how to manage their time.
Learn how to manage their time is A, which is correct. B is
live and organize.
Live an organised life. And C is
Work hard.
Work hard. Now, you're doing exactly what everybody else. That's all right, that's all right. I can criticise a multiple choice question, but can I write one? I think, if you'll excuse my language, that is a bloody good effort for 2 minutes, actually. I'll show you, because we're running out of time, I'll show you what the actual one was, and it's not perfect. I'll show you what the actual one was that went in the... Do well in their studies, make good use of their time, wake up early every day. So actually you were, in the ballpark.
A and C are excluded, certainly because
Yeah, but see, you see, B is the correct answer. It's the summary of the text of what the student is saying. But look how clever this is, because A, do well in their studies, that's dragging in homework there, and C, wake up early every day, because the student, that sounds right for a sports student, doesn't it? And she mentions wake up. So the 3 are all plausible, but if you look into the text, 2 are wrong. Now there's a criticism I would make of this one, which is that A and B are paraphrases, and C copies some language from the text. Wake up. And what happens when you have that is quite often your poor students will pick C, because they think, oh, I heard that, I heard wake up. So they don't process. So the other rule is they must all be paraphrases, ideally, of the text, or all copy a word from the text, so that they're all as similar as possible. Okay, so well done you. I'm impressed. You can be on my item writing team. That's it. We're going to have to stop. No, have we got time? What time do we stop? I can't remember. What time is it now? Oh, you've got time to do another one. Good. What do you mean no? Who said no?